Okay. Good morning. So we continue our Odyssey in the Hemshech Samach Vov. We are on page 5 of the Hemshech. Let me sum up what we've learned so far and continue. So we are entered now into, we'll call it the larger picture that the Rebbe Rashab has began to discuss the very purpose of existence. Or as he puts it, the Tachlis Brias B'Savas Ha'elamis, the purpose of the creation of existence, and Tachlis HaKavana B'Yiridus HaNeshama B'Guf, of the soul's, the ultimate, the purpose of the soul's descent into this world. So it's not just purpose of existence, the purpose of our lives as we enter into this reality. This came after a series of questions, we could say, on the smaller picture, which means the immediate picture about Rosh Hashanah, Shabbos, the sounding of shofar, that we don't sound the shofar when Rosh Hashanah Shabbos, the questions he asked on that, the questions on Malchus, Zechrein, Shefris. And then at the bottom of page 4, he began, Lahavin Kol Zet. To understand all this, let us begin preface by discussing the purpose of existence. And what is it? The purpose is, in one line, is to draw down the infinite, transcendent, divine consciousness into this lowest of worlds. In the language that we are accustomed to, Nesava Kadosh Baruch Hu, God desired to have a home, a comfortable home for the Atzmus. That's what a home is about, like he said. The very core of a person is comfortable in their homes, not just their expression, but their very essence. So to Lamaila, Kavyachal, so to speak, that Atzmus Ein Sof should be comfortable in where in Tachtenim, in this lowest of worlds. Using more Kabbalistic or Hasidic terminology, is the Yichud of Sevav Kalalman and Mamal Kalalman, transcendent energy and immanent energy, Kutchabrichu V'Shchinta, that we say before every mitzvah, Kutchabrichu, and so the Yichud of Kutchabrichu V'Shchinta. As we discussed on the top, bottom of page 4 and top of page 5. And then he cited the Emek HaMelech, another Kabbalistic work from the students of the Arizal, defining it in more terms with the context of the Tzimtzum, that in order for existence to be, God, so to speak, concealed his conscious presence, just as a teacher would conceal his presence so there's room and space, what's called a chol mokim pani, for another consciousness. That's would be the first step that is necessary for there to be in a reality that is conscious of itself and not of godliness. Pre-Tzimtzum, which is also now, it's all conceptual, is a state where it's only divine consciousness. After the Tzimtzum comes the Kav, a very narrow stream, like think of a narrow laser beam stream of divine consciousness now within this space. And that's where is the creation of the Hisavas HaKelim, Umetzias HaElemis, both existence and the containers, which containers here essentially signifies everything that is in outside of the Ur, which is divine consciousness. The Keli is like the recipient. So now you have a place of Kelim, or like the student would be the Keli, and the teacher would be the Ur, or the teacher would be the Mashpia, and the Ur is the light coming from the teacher to the student. And that's how creation comes into place. However, that's just creation. Now comes the human being, where God placed Adam and Chava, and then all of us in this world. That's Yiridus Neshama B'Guf, the Neshama coming below, placed them in Gan Eden of the Lashamra to do what? Of the Lashamra is mitzvah seseh and mitzvah seseh, that through Torah and mitzvahs, to increase more than just the narrow kav, but to increase the energy through this channel of the kav, to the point that you have the Hamshach Teisrus Eres Idea kav within this Chol L'Mokim Pani and within this space, and that essentially increases light to the point in the future where we'll fill the entire space with the Ur that was there before the Tzimtzum. So divine consciousness will return, complete divine consciousness, but that's through our work as we expand our containers. He's going to give the example soon with teacher and student. I've been using it already because it just makes it simpler. which basically means as the student grows and studies, the student draws more and more intelligence. So the kelim, so to speak, expand and mature, and the more they do so, the more energy they draw. Literally as it is even on a physical level, as we grow and mature, to the point that we can become as wise as the teacher himself. In this context means that the existence after the Tzimtzum can become like the Ein Sof, the consciousness before the Tzimtzum. But then comes the question, which we began learning, and I'm going to go over it again now. So the next paragraph on page 5, seemingly this is not understood. What is accomplished through all this? So going back to square one, we already had complete divine consciousness, seamless divine consciousness. I'm going to read it again. Even though we read it, it's worthwhile reading it again because it's so fundamental to the whole discussion that which will follow. So in the middle of the new paragraph on page 5, we read on last class, but I'm going over it again. The text, if you want to follow the text, you can find it either in the book if you have the Sefer, or online. We scanned it all in PDF on samachvav.com, as well as it's posted also on our WhatsApp Samach Vav group. If you're on the group, you can find it there as well. You can download it, you can print it, you can look at it on your screen. And if you're not part of that group, you'd like to be part of it, which discusses, it's a good group to be part of this whole discussion, questions, answers, scheduling, postings of different sources, and so on. So just let us know your name and phone number, and we'll include you. So, what is the innovation? What was accomplished through this? Isn't it the case that even pre-Tzimtzum, divine consciousness and Ein Sof filled the entire space that would later become space? So what did we accomplish? You emptied the space, good, and now you just brought back the energy that was there before. So the ostensible answer, achal pi poshetu, meaning pashtus, what was accomplished now, as he's going to explain, is it's true. This is the energy that was there before, but there was no other entity before. Before there was no room for anything else. Now there's a student, or in the mashal, or there's now existence. So there's an existence to absorb and receive and retain that energy. That's the pashtus, the basic ostensible chiddush. And so he says, the tefillah k'shay ein sof b'mokem achol mamala mokem achol hariloy hoyev shalis mitzir selamis. Pre-Tzimtzum, well, there be no Tzimtzum, there was no room. It was not even possible for there to be another existence. So the concept of having a gili in existence didn't exist because there was no existence. And there was no room for existence. Now that there was a Tzimtzum and it emptied the space, obviously that's all metaphorical. And now there's a space for existence. Now when you draw into this space energy from Lifnei Tzimtzum, Hariyagili hu be'elamus. So that's the addition here. Now there's someone to receive it. It would be like, think of it being alone in this universe, and you have no one to be mashpiyah to. You're the only person that lives. Then you leave room for someone to come into the picture, and now you have someone to give to. So the chiddush is this receiving and transmitting into the elamus. And that's where we stopped. That's the chiddush. But he's going to elaborate on this in more detail, and you'll soon see he's going to give a deeper answer. This is al pi poshet. In general, whenever you see, especially in Chassidus Chabad, the words al pi poshet, very likely he's going to come. He says that's the ostensible. Now we go deeper into it, we'll see there's more to the story. But one step at a time. And this is, as I said, one of the places in Chassidus that you can always go back to whenever you want to look at a source where the purpose of existence is elaborated upon and the dynamics of our Aveda. Samach Vav is a perfect place. There are a few others I mentioned there in the footnotes, but Samach Vav is an excellent place because he elaborates on this whole picture. Very often, this topic is tangentially, or not even tangentially, but it's referred to in many Maimarim, obviously. This is so fundamental. But here it's an elaborate. Even in chapter 36 in Tanya, he doesn't go through the tzimtzum, he doesn't go through the details. There he just says and explains what means dira b'tachtenim, the very fact that would draw down a divine energy into a world where the divine is concealed, as he discussed it there. But here he goes through many more of the dynamics. So now he's going to continue on this point. What does he say? So I'm continuing here. V'ima yes, and even though the tchilas hisavusam lo yoyev shaliyas kishoye me era shalifnei tzimtzum, the fact that there's a tzimtzum tells you something. That means that if the tzimtzum didn't happen, the Eir Ein Sof would not have left room for any existence. So now you're saying that once there's existence, now you can bring that Eir Ein Sof in. But what does that mean exactly? That Eir Ein Sof did not leave room for existence. The tzimtzum left room. As soon as you bring the light in, you could argue it should blind us. Think of like the sun is shining brightly. You can't look at it directly. So you need a tzimtzum. It could either be a tzimtzum that the light is diminished or covered up, or you put on sunglasses or whatever it may be. But as soon as you take off the sunglasses or the diminishment removed, the light becomes intense again. So how does this work exactly? That pre-Tzimtzum doesn't allow for existence. So he's not asking a direct question. He's qualifying and explaining what he's saying here. So even though in the beginning with Isavus, which means before they actually came into being, there wasn't possible for them to so their very existence could not be there as long as that light was shining, meaning the light before the tzimtzum. Nevertheless, once they came into being, once you left room, and you concealed it even for a short period, again, this is not in time, talking here conceptually, now they can receive also this air. And he's going to explain what that means. In other words, going back to the example of student and teacher, if the teacher is just allowing his brilliance to shine, so there's no student that would be able to really be in his presence because it's just too overwhelming. But once he's quiet, so to speak, and he allows a student to be in his presence, then something changes. Now, if the energy is manifest, as we're going to learn, in a directed way, because remember, we're not just opening up the door again to Lifnei Tzimtzum, it's coming through a kav. The kav is regulating the flow. So even though it is originating from before the Tzimtzum, but as we'll soon learn, now that there is room for existence because of the Tzimtzum, so even when the energy comes into this space, it's coming in a certain particular flow, but as the kalim, as the recipient expands and is able to receive more and more, it can actually receive the Eir from before the Tzimtzum, and more of it until the Asad Lavi, where it literally can be literally seamless, just as it was before the Tzimtzum, which we'll get to later. So he's going to explain now with an example. Now this example is an example from Kabbalah, from Eitz Chaim, from the Arizal. Another discussion around this topic of the Tzimtzum, where the Arizal asks a very fundamental question. And then we're going to apply it to this situation. So he says like this, V'yesh leimer. To understand this, we can understand it by, you could say that it's similar to the Eitz Chaim, K'mosh Koseh be'Eitz Chaim. Le'inyan gili hakav. So the Eitz Chaim asks a very interesting question, which you'll see is very similar to what we're discussing now. Different context, however. Yes? Question. You made a statement. In order for there to be existence, you have to completely conceal the Eir Ein Sof, to the point that nishar mokim poni v'cholol. Chol mokim poni, rather. An empty space, completely empty. No light is there at all. There's a reshima, there's a trace, but the trace is concealed as well. It's an empty space. If you want to physically, if you look in Eitz Chaim, you'll see there's an actually image there. Some say that Rizal made that image. The image is of like a hole. and then you see a line come into that hole. It's like the hole of a bagel, if you wish. So there's a space. So think of it like, let's say, a space that's filled completely with water. And then you contract the water and it recedes. It recedes back. And what's left is a space in the middle. So he asks a question. Now that afterwards you send a kav, because it doesn't remain empty. Afterwards it says that comes the kav. The kav is a line, a stream, kav achut, like a thread, like a laser beam of energy. Yes, it's not the full, complete area and stuff as it was before, because there is a space, but that line enters. So he asks the question, why did you have to have the full tzimtzum? He should have just made a tzimtzum and left a line. Should have left a little energy there. Why do you have to conceal it completely? And then let the kav enter. Just conceal enough and just leave a kav. Why do you need that complete silence, so to speak, that complete leap? That's Eitz Chaim's question, which he's going to say now. We'll read it inside here. It says like this. Le'inyan gili hakav. What does he say? The im hayanishra betchila hakav. He answers the question. He asks the question. He doesn't not quoting the question. He's saying right away the answer. Why couldn't he just leave the kav instead of complete concealment, and then comes that stream of divine consciousness? So he says, if he would have left right away a kav, lo yoye efsher li'isavas hakelim, it still would have been too intense and wouldn't allow for kelim to emerge. Because that even though yes, it would be only a thin line of light, but its qualitative energy is never been really disturbed. So it still carries the power of Finite Tzimtzum consciousness. And what you need is that you need complete shutdown, so to speak, and then comes the kav. Now again, this is all conceptual. In other words, when if the teacher would, instead of just becoming silent, would say, you know what, I'm going to start teaching very slowly. But he continues speaking, it's still connected to the teacher's level of consciousness, and that's still too much. So you need a complete shutdown, so to speak. Then comes the kav. That's what he's basically coming to say here. So he says, so there was lo yefshel li'isavas hakelim. But once you left that space, and now there's the kelim there. So you have the kelim, gam kishemer behem kav, because you gave room for that independent consciousness to exist. Now when the kav comes, einim is batlim. The kelim do not get nullified or eliminated because you gave them room, you let them be. If you think about it, a very practical example is very straightforward. Just 1 second, please. Okay. A very practical example would be anyone who's been as a parent or an educator for that matter, but let's take a parent. When your child begins to walk, first time they take a step. So of course they don't walk easily, and they'll probably slip a few times. What do? So you can hold their hand and help them, encourage them. Sometimes we do that. But at some point you're going to have to let go. You're going to have to let go. Yeah, you could be there for them and show them, I'm here, I'll catch you. Walk to me, walk 2 steps, one step. But at some point you have to let go. Why? Why can't you just say, let the child stand, you hold their hand, and never let go? Because they never will establish a certain confidence and independence to be able to walk on their own. Once they establish that, then you can help them, you can support them. So in any educational process, inspiring others, so there's a time where the teacher, obviously, or the giver has to do their part to inspire and motivate. But then you need to, at some point, you need to allow the student or the child to do something on their own. They make mistakes. It may only be very rudimentary, it may be just basic. But they have to have something to build their own initiative, their own effort And then you can support and help. And actually, the wisdom of proper parenting and proper education is the proper balance, where you say, here, I'm letting you do it. It's your assignment. And then how much do you give to help and support them? Not always easy to know. Sometimes you're supporting too much. Sometimes you're supporting too little. So in the same context here, just using a very practical example, if the kav would have remained from the outset, and there would never have been a complete empty space, there would never really be independence, because the kav would still be being informed by the before the tzimtzum. It's a little like we spoke about a few weeks ago, a beautiful sikha from the Rebbe about why Chodesh Cheshvan, the month we're in right now, is completely devoid of any holidays. Tishrei is full of holidays. Rosh Hashanah, Seis Metshuva, Yom Kippur, days before Sukkot, Hishan Rabbis, Mishmini Atzeres, Simchas Torah. Then suddenly we have a drop, a complete paradigm shift. Cheshvan, no holidays at all. Why couldn't it be balanced more? And the Rebbe's answer is because when you really want to see what a person is made of, you have to take away all the revelations. Now you're on your own, so to speak. I mean, God forbid, you're never on your own. There's always God behind the scenes. But on a reveal level, let's see what you can accomplish. Like, Lech lecham artzacham v'latachem beis avicha. So the first month after Tishrei, all months afterwards, Kislev has holiday, Tevis, the Rebbe enumerates in that talk that he gave. They all have holidays. Cheshvan is the only one no holidays. Doesn't mean there's no Shabbos, doesn't mean it doesn't have power in it, but not quite in contrast to Tishrei. So in a way, it's like a full tzimtzum, just an example. It's not a perfect example, obviously. And then, through Araveda, now you're establishing, then the Eir begins to manifest. So he's saying, basically, that Arizal's answer is, had the Kav remained, yes, everything would have been removed, but a Kav remained, it still would have been, you can call it Hamshacham Amay Lamat, still coming from the divine. Now that there's been a space, and there's a break, so to speak, and now there's room for the Kalim to begin to manifest, so now the Kav can enter. Still enters as a Kav, doesn't enter in full glory. It's still a narrow stream. But the Kalim now can receive, and they can now grow and expand. That's the answer of the Arizal. The Rashab is now going to apply that to the same question that he asked, which was this question: what's the chiddush if Avodas Hashem, the Avdel Shamra, draws down the Eir before the Tzimtzum? What was accomplished? So he said what was accomplished was that now it's in the Kalim. But like he asked, but like he qualified, but without the Tzimtzum, there would be no room for Kalim. So what did the Tzimtzum accomplish? So he's going to say it's similar to what it accomplished regarding the Kav. That's what the Rebbe Rashab is going to say. Just laying it out before we read it inside. So let me read it, and then I'll stop if there are any questions. Kamoy Kain, says the Rebbe Rashab now. Like the Arizal answers regarding the Kav, you could also answer in general. The same thing you can say regarding all the energy pre-Tzimtzum. Once the Tzimtzum allowed for existence to emerge, to be created, yeah. Just look at the footnote if there's something worthwhile mentioning. Just elaborates upon. So now it could also receive the Eir in Sava before the Tzimtzum. So it's not exactly the same thing that Arizal is saying, but it's the same logic, basically. So the same reason that this complete Tzimtzum that allows the Kav, the same thing regarding the Eir in Sava before the Tzimtzum as well, is now capable to be able to enter. The fact is, it enters through the Kav, actually. It doesn't say that explicitly, but that's the fact. So that allows it to enter in a way that it will not be. So that's the chiddush. That's the chiddush. And I was going to give a mashal for this, the student and teacher mashal, teacher-student mashal that I've been using. But let me stop for a moment. Maybe we should read the mashal. But you know what? In case anyone has any questions so far, what I've read, I'm happy to take any question. But if it's a question on the very understanding of this, I'd probably wait till after the mashal to see how he explains it. But still, let me stop, because this is, again, very fundamental material in many ways. So if anybody wants to clarify anything or question, please. Mhm. Before I continue, let me just say more of a housekeeping statement because some of you are the first time joining our class. Those of you that have been here before know my methodology, but I just wanted to clarify something I already said, just in general about how my logic works with regarding questions and answers. I am a big believer in every question. I always say there's no such thing as a stupid question. Any question that a person asks is legitimate and valid, and I would always validate because that's how you grow. Lo habaishan lomad. The bashful one will not learn. You have to question. Sometimes the questions may be very basic, but I would never hesitate to tell you, never stop yourself asking a question because you think the question may be stupid or maybe not, or maybe foolish, or maybe based on ignorance. That's how we all grow. We're all ignorant until we ask. We're all ignorant until we learn it. So we're all in the same boat. So I just want to make that statement clear. However, because there are questions of different sorts, I have to make judgment call. You can ask a question that is a great question, but it's not like relevant to our discussion here. Like someone could say, how do you explain free will and God knowing everything? It's a great question, and their entire pages discuss it, but it's not our theme right here. There are sometimes questions that are an outgrowth of something you're learning. You learn it and immediately provokes another question. So here's where the judgment call comes in. Is it relevant to what we're learning? Or is it a question that may be on your mind? And again, a valid question, but should reserve another time to talk about it or talk about it after the class. So I just wanted to make sure to clarify because sometimes it may come across that I'm being harsh or being tough, if you wish. It's not my intention. My intention is because there are many people in this class right now live, as well as afterwards when they listen to it, and there they don't even have control. It's a recording. I want to make sure that, because I know in the past, sometimes we go off on a tangent, and people who are either not interested in that tangent or get lost because they barely can figure out what we're learning inside here. So I have to really, so I just want to make sure everyone understands. So all questions are fine. The question is the context, when to ask it and where to ask it. So there's some questions that immediately when you ask them, I will answer because they're directly relevant to what we're learning here and will help everyone, in my opinion at least. There are questions that may be tangential, not directly, so we can discuss it either offline or later after we finish a certain topic. And then there are questions completely from a different, not at all relevant to our conversation here. And then I have different formats. You can ask the question on My Life Chassidus Applied, submit a question on Chassidus Applied. Every Sunday night I answer questions. And or ask it in our WhatsApp group and so on. So I just wanted to make sure that that's clear. So there's no censorship here. All questions are acceptable. Not only acceptable, are encouraged. And just a question of when to answer them and what context. And remember, what's on one person's mind may not be another person's mind. So something may be very pressing to you as you ask it. Now, I had to deal with this myself as well. When the Rebbe would speak of Farbrengen, trust me, there are many times he said something, I right away had a question. But obviously, that was not the time for me to ask. So we'd listen and learn it well. Very often, these questions got answered in time because the Rebbe himself would answer it. Even if it didn't, there was a time afterwards. On Sunday, Monday, I would then ask a question to the Rebbe in writing. So I've personally experienced it. It's not like I'm just applying it to our class. It's a way of learning. Okay, just wanted to make that clear, both for everybody in the class and also those that are newcomers. So with that said, he's not going to give a mashal for this discussion here. And keep in mind again, the key point here is that what is the chiddush that happened through Avodah? Even though the air was there before the Tzimtzum was there before the Tzimtzum, so now it was concealed. So the answer, of course, is now we can receive it, but he's explaining how the process works. Because once there's room a room is made for the student, that's the mashal he's going to give, now the student can work with something. And once they work, they can draw more and more energy, the kav, and the eir ein before the tzimtzum. It says, v'yesh lemer ha-mashal b'zeh. And we can say a mashal. Now, yesh lemer means is the Rebbe Rashab's mashal. Now, this mashal is actually the Alter Rebbe's mashal. In general, about the tzimtzum, why there's a tzimtzum, The Alter Rebbe says in L'Kutei Torah in Buchel Kesai, at the end, in the famous Maimer L'Hoven Mashakosav Beitzes Chaim, L'Hoven Inya Mashakosav Beitzes Chaim, about Tzimtzum, the example of student and teacher. The Yeshlema of the Rebbe Rashabi is applying it to this particular topic here. The difference between what happens after the concealment, why we can receive, in contrast to before the concealment, we could not. It would have been too overwhelming. So he says, Yeshlema HaMoshel Bez. Here's the Moshel. Kamei ba'ashpos ha'seichel ma'arav l'talmud. Like in the transmission of intelligence from a teacher to a student. If the teacher, hypothetically, would have been mashpia, would have transmitted right in the beginning. They sit down, first time they're sitting down, and the teacher is immediately sharing with him the depth, the depth of the innermost part of his wisdom. The deepest things the teacher is aware of. Remember, this is a teacher and student, they're not equals. That's clear. So if it doesn't say which level student, but imagine a 3-year-old child who doesn't even know Aleph Beis yet. He doesn't say that here. This could be even a student that's 20 years old and knows his material. But compared to the teacher, the Emek Primis Chachmase he's not aware of. Imagine the teacher just opens up, no tzimtzum, just starts flowing. He would not be possible for him to receive it. The teacher could say it, but the student's not going to understand it. So that's a given, that the teacher is going to have to transmit it. He has to give he has to give him something. Can't just be completely nothing is flowing, but it has to be mitzumtzum. It can't be the pnimius chachmase. Shalafi erkei. That's the key. That's relative and commensurate and tailored to the student, wherever he's at. That's the real chiddush of education. Not just to share ideas, but the idea is that the student can absorb it properly. I mean, similar like we speak about Gvuras Kshamim. If the rain comes down like a flood, it will destroy the fields. It has to come down raindrops. An mitzumtzum. Raindrops can be absorbed in the ground, then the next raindrop, and slowly the earth gets saturated and can properly receive the hashpah of the rain. But now, what happens next? So what is the dynamic here? After the student receives this limited, you could say concentrated, or diminished, however you translate it. This is the key. And he grasped and he absorbed it in his seichel. In other words, it came in a way that he was able to retain it, not overwhelm him, not confuse him, but he's able to retain whatever seichel the teacher did give him, the mitzumtzum, hine achakach, afterwards, harihu boel emek primius seichel harav, next page 6. Then, in time, he doesn't say how long, because he's talking here in general terms, he can come and arrive to the depth of the pnimius of the seichel that initially would not have been able for him to receive of the Rav. Top of page 6. And he gives an example in the parentheses, famous Gemara, where it talks about Adar Boim Shnin, until 40 years old, a person doesn't really appreciate or arrive at the full understanding of the teacher's of the das of his Rav. He says it here briefly. This idea that a person arrives and fully appreciates, fully absorbs daita de Rabbe. It doesn't say 40 years, but that's the Gemara's lashon. That's a long time. There are two opinions whether it's when you're age 40 or 40 years from when you studied it, but regardless. So, but it tells you that it's a process. That's the key, the process. And that's the whole point of Adira B'Tachtenim. God, yes, if there was a tzimtzum, and then after the tzimtzum, Hashem says, okay, here's back all the oil that was there before the tzimtzum, that would defeat the whole purpose. Then obviously there's no chiddush. Not only no chiddush, you wonder why did it happen in the first place? But here there was space created. and now there's an entity that can receive. And it receives step by step, drop by drop, and absorbs. As it does so, you have now the fertile ground of a true relationship. So what you have here really is the essence of a healthy relationship. I have used this so many times, literally in marital counseling even, in how we create space for each other, and also how we get close to each other. Because it's a balance, it's a dance. Too much space is too separate. Too little space, there's no boundaries. So if you really think about what we're learning right here, you're really getting the chemistry, you can say the anatomy of a true relationship. That there is another, and the other is receiving from the mashpia, but in a way they can receive and grow at their pace, on their terms. If we master this balance, it's the secret to everything in life. Every relationship, whether it's relationships between spouses, between parents and children, between communities, between nations even. Because people have their interests. I'm not getting now into the issues, the corruption or hostilities resulting from people's self-interest or greed and so on. That needs to be addressed too. But we're talking about even the main fact that we're just separate entities. You and I can have two different opinions about something. How do we resolve a disagreement? I'm talking about all with love and kindness. How do we come to terms? How do we create mediation, so to speak? All this is based on what we're learning right now. Essentially, the proper balance. So if you think about Tzimtzum and Kav, and then the Avoid and everything we're discussing, it's really a formula for what a real relationship is. And that's what God wanted. Adira b'tachteinim. He wanted tachteinim, but he wanted adira. Adira, Le'yis Baruch, is a very powerful thing. If you try to make adira right away in the beginning of creation, it would not be possible. You have to create space. Adam and Chava were put in the Gan Eden. They were even given free will. They were told, don't eat from the tree of knowledge, etc. Okay, then things happened. But the point is, you have to create the space. And then, once the space is created, then the journey begins. And you not only could, you should begin to access the Kav, and through the Kav, the Erein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum. And that's where you have both the Chiddush. What's the Chiddush? The Chiddush is we can now receive it. And the capacity to do so, we have now the dynamics for that. And the example, of course, was the Yesh Lemer from the Eitz Chaim regarding the Kav, as we learned. So this example with student and teacher really is a perfect personification of the Chiddush of Chassidus Chabad. In Eitz Chaim, he doesn't give an example of a teacher and a student. He just says Kav, Tzimtzum, so on. But the Rebbe Rashab does. And this is how you see a Chabad Chassidus explain something in a way that suddenly you realize, wow, this isn't just some esoteric concept, mystical concept. It's actually, like I said, the formula of all relationships. Will be a cholte lekabel. And he's capable of receiving. Let me just see here. Yeah, I'll stop here if there are any questions. Then we'll continue. He's still not finished with the topic. As I said, there's more to the whole story than we've learned so far. But so far, here's what he discussed. Any questions, any comments, please?
I'm wondering if you can explain, unless he's going to, as later in the Hemshech, how did the Kalim get there? I mean, I know the short answer is that the sort root of the Kalim is the Rishimu. But is it the Kav itself interacting with the Rishimu sort of builds the Kalim, or I'm sorry, it's just a basic fundamental principle I don't recall exactly.
Well, earlier, the previous page, he said briefly, he answered that very briefly in the parentheses. If you look back, you'll say, Vayidezeh, on page 5. He says, Vayidezeh hisavus b'peil, yeah. So there is. Remember, you could ask the same question about the Tzimtzum itself. If Erein Sof is filling the whole thing, where did the Tzimtzum come from? So you have to say it's the power of God, just as he has the power to reveal, Erein Sof, he also has the power to conceal. So the power of concealing is essentially a power that's going to be inside the chol l'makom pani, because that's how it was created. It wasn't created on its own. It's God's intention to conceal. Just like this teacher can teach, he also can be silent. His silence is also power. That power is ultimately the power that creates the kelim as well.
Okay, thank you.
That's why in Chassidus you'll find very often the word Tzimtzum in Shayachud V'Amunah, the end of chapter 4, he says, Tzimtzum nikra kelim. The Tzimtzum is actually called kelim, because that's what the Tzimtzum really is ultimately doing. It's not just concealing, creating.
I see.
You think of the chol l'makom pani is a keli if you wish.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, the Rishima, I don't want to go into right now its particular role, but think of it, it is the concentrated power of gvul, of the power of concealment, but it's a power, and therefore it is a trace from Finite Tzimtzum. It's a whole discussion. I am Beis in volume 3 elaborate a lot about the Rishimu. Now is not the time to go into that. It's a whole part of the discussion, but it's not really relevant to what we're learning right now. By the way, in the category that I said earlier, it's relevant, but not right here. It's relevant more, and there are plenty of places there you can find more about it. If you look at footnote, I believe 69. Let me see. Yeah, footnote 69 probably refers to it, and I am Beis in volume 3 is a lot about this topic. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just by the way, you know the focus issue with your camera it's pretty strong today.
It's good or not good?
It's not good. You're very, very blurry. The books over your right shoulder are like as clear as could be, but you are not clear at all.
Okay, we'll have to work on that. Yeah.
Okay, just a heads up. Yeah. Thank you.
Good. Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay. V'tzarech leimer, continuing the first line on page 6. Rebbe Rashab continues, says, we have to say that what allows for this growth, now that you have this independent, you have the student, and he is beginning to absorb what this teacher is giving him on his terms, on the student's terms. So what is the process of this growth? He says you have to say that growth is coming. It's not just a result of the teacher directing and channeling the energy to fit the container of the student. You have to say it's also coming due to the tikkun of the keli. In other words, the teacher could be teaching in a very regulated way, not overwhelming the student at all, but there's something the student has to do. And that is that the student is listening and working in receiving it properly. That's called tikkun hakeli. The al yedei nitfus b'yaseichel. As the keli grasps, as within the keli is grasped the seichel that's being transmitted, and the seichel here is the oir. The light that's flowing is the seichel. Mistakin u'mizdachach haklei meichin shalei. The klei meichin, the container of his mind, of his mind, gets repaired and refined. Repaired here does not mean broken and repaired. It means improved and refined. That's what happens. When you look at any student who's growing, as they begin to learn, so in the beginning it's new material, but slowly as they repeat it and review it and work at it, it becomes something easier for them to understand till it becomes in a refined way, so their kelim become refined. And that is the whole process of a true education, ukiyadua, as it's known. Again, I'm just looking at the footnotes to see if there's something. Okay. The bashpas harav letalmid, in the transmission of a teacher to a student, hari beribui hashpa nasis chushi hatalmud k'moy chushi harav. Then the general relationship and hashpa, transmission from the student, teacher to student, with ribi hashpa, not one time. Ribui means an abundance of that interaction, of the hashpah. The more the student is learning with the teacher, what happens is the chushei hatalmid, the very poignant expression. The chushei hatalmid, meaning the skills of the student, become kamei chushei harav, become like the skills of this teacher. In other words, like, not just that they learn information, even the very methodology. And you see that with really teachers and students, mentors and recipients who have built a strong relationship. After a while, the student sounds like the teacher. Not necessarily a carbon copy or a clone, but a lot of things the student has learned, how to think, how to process, how to answer a question, to the point that you really cannot even tell sometimes. You say, wow. It's like you hear the student, it sounds exactly like the teacher would have solved the issue. Even though the student is not going back to the teacher, because what happens is, like he's saying here, the keli has become refined and shaped in the same image as this teacher. Now, in a good process, the teacher too had a teacher. So if you really think about it, all the ish mipi ish, student to teacher, student to teacher to student, teacher to student, all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu, if it was done the right way, it's almost like an almost type of seamless flow, that when we learn Torah, we're learning with a similar methodology as the teachers before us. But it's more than just methodology. Chushei HaTalmid, Chushei HaRav is more than just the same method. It's actually like the chushim, it's the skills. And you see this, I mean, all interns, all people are in training. You know, when you train and tell someone, okay, you're finished training, what are you really saying? That you've learned the ropes, you've learned how to do it from someone who is a master, who in turn learned it from someone before him. So all this is demonstrating that it's not just the teacher's work. Of course, this is so much dependent on the teacher doing the right job, tailoring, as I said, channeling the energy, but there's also the process of the tikkun hakeli, which means that in the context of this is all a mashal of pre and post tzimtzum, that post tzimtzum, even though it may be the same oir from before the tzimtzum, at this point the api pasha, that's what we're saying, but now it's completely tailored and directed and integrated and internalized, absorbed by the recipient, and that's a major chiddush. Because before the tzimtzum, that did not exist. There was no recipient. Not only do you have a recipient here, you have another entity that is becoming divine, which is already the chiddush of dira b'tachtenim. So even if you were to say that the dira, the Eir Ein Sof before the tzimtzum is exactly as it was before the tzimtzum, and we'll soon learn that it's more than that. But even on the poshet, alpi poshet, it's already a major chiddush. They have another entity, a Talmud, who's like Chushei Harav. Chushei Harav would be the Eir Ein Sof before the tzimtzum. But now there's a tzimtzum. The Eir comes in a kav, in a very directed flow. The recipient is slowly growing, and ultimately the recipient can now receive the Eir Ein Sof even before the tzimtzum, to the point that he become like Chushei Harav. Like I said, 40 years or whatever the amount of time where he becomes like his teacher. But it was only possible because there was a tzimtzum and there was a very gradual and directed flow. That is critical in this process. So all this is coming to explain the chiddush, but it's still al pi poshet. There's more to the picture than even what we're discussing here. So now he's going to go back. This is all a dugma. This is all an example of the teacher-student. So now he says, ubedugma kazeis, says the Rebbe Rashab. Now that I've given you the mashal of teacher-student, example for this, Yuvan will understand how it is lamaila. The la'achesh nesava elamis, umer behem eir akav, that after the worlds were created, and in them radiate the eir akav, this narrow stream is radiating into the existence, like the example of the student, and now he brings a Kabbalistic concept, which the mashal that he gave so far will help us understand. V'yadua gamkein, and it's also known, the ha'er pnimi mitzachtzech, chetzi hakeli mibefnim, va'er makiv mitzachtzech chetzi keli mibachutz. So the Rebbe Rashab, I'm going to explain, of course, what this means. Just give me a moment. He's now using a Kabbalistic concept from Eitz Chaim as well. You'll see the footnote. in footnote number 77, right? That is going to give us the Kabbalistic language for what we said before. We say the Tikkun HaKeli. So what is happening with the Tikkun HaKeli exactly? So if we could visualize it, it would look like something like this. I mentioned before raindrops going into the ground. If you're able to magnify the results, so the earth is dry and it needs moisture in order to be fertile and grow and so on. So it begins to rain. The rain is absorbed, the drops into the ground. The earth becomes moist. As it gets moist, it starts to generate, it's like a catalyst, the power of growth within the earth. That moisture combined with the seeds and everything else you do to make sure that the earth grows, its produce, its plants, its grass, whatever, is now activated. That's what the moisture is doing. So there's a process. Scientists will give you the whole breakdown exactly what is going on as best as they can. What is that in Ruchnius, the process of the Ur of the teacher going into the student's mind, and what exactly is happening? So we don't usually think of it in such graphic detail, but in Kabbalah there's an expression for it. It says the Ur Pnimi Mitzachzach. Now the word Mitzachzach is a very interesting word. Tzachzach can also mean, it plays with, Tzachzach means it like softens, it refines. Mitzachzach, when you say it's Mitzachzach, sometimes I say it could, Mitzachzach can also mean like playing with something, you're like manipulating it. But tzachzach could also mean refining it, from the word tzach, making it more subtle. It's like taking a clump of earth and softening it, making it moist. So it becomes malleable, more malleable, and you can shape it into something. Or like taking clay, raw clay, or raw dough, and you shape it into something, or anything. So Kabbalah uses this expression that the Ur Pnimi, an imminent Ur, which is another word from a Malakalam, it refines the half of the container from within. Because a keli, when you make a keli, let's say you want to make a clay pot. So you take a raw piece of clay, and now you start shaping it. You soften it up, but then you'll see the potter will first keep rolling it on the inside to make sure that the inside of the container is smooth, no lumps, right? And then there's another part of being mitzachzeh the keli mibachutz. You also want the outer part of the container of this. I'm using clay pottery because it's an easy example. Could be any type of shaping. So there's the mitzachzeh the keli mibachutz. That's the makif, makif. So essentially what we're saying here is, and I can elaborate a lot, but I'll just be brief, that once the tzimtzum has happened and the hakav is entering, remember this hakav has both makif and pnimi within it. In Eitz Chaim later, he speaks about how the kav misagel, the kav goes ahead and creates a circle. That's makif. But then the kav itself is a line, is pnimi. So bottom line is, the as it's shaping the containers and creating them, like a potter, and we learned about the example that God, comparing God to a potter from the Zohar, the Tikla, is essentially shaping the container. So when the teacher is teaching, what he's really doing is a lot of things at once. He's teaching information, obviously, but he's also training the student how to think. And that process of how to think has a pnim, has a nachutz. Again, I'm not going to go too much detail because he doesn't really elaborate. He just wants to say that there's a tikkun of the keli going on here. So there's a chiddush happening here. All this did not happen before the tzimtzum. There was no need for this, and there was no possibility for it, frankly. But now that there is a tzimtzum, and there's space for the student, and the hakav is entering, so the kelim are being shaped. The pnimi is shaping the inner part of the keli, because of course pnimi enters the inner part. The makif, which never enters the keli, from outside is shaping it in a way that it should be smooth on the outside. So essentially, the Kabbalah, the Eitz Chaim is teaching us how the kelim are formed. Now keep in mind, the kelim here are very, very subtle. Think of it like the first stage of conception, where you only have one cell. The cell is not yet even split into two. So I'm talking about even human life begins with one cell being produced from the fertilization of an egg by seed, or one cell is not even the size of a follicle of hair. It's so small. But that cell will ultimately split into 2, then into 4, and then to 8, 16. And then you'll have close to between 35 trillion and 75 trillion cells, right, within you and I. When the child is born, it has trillions of cells, all started with one keli. So in a way, it's a good example, another visual example of how a keli is shaped and formed from its earliest stages. So right after the tzimtzum, you're talking about the earliest stages, but something is being shaped and formed, and that will allow for the oyer to be able to enter. Because obviously one cell does not create a life as we know it. For a child to be born after 9 months, a developed fetus, it has to have many kelim. The kelim are now ready to receive the oyer hariyah, power to see, to hear, the brain, the mind, the heart, and so on. So in the Kabbalistic, we could call the Big Bang of the Tzimtzum Harishon, this is the early stages of that formation that he describes the pnimi metzachzich mibefnim, hakeli mibefnim, makim metzachzich mibachutz. And that's the dynamics happening in these early stages, right after the Tzimtzum. Now keep in mind, because all this is conceptual, not in time, this is happening as we speak, all the time. In a child, obviously, during conception is the beginning of the 9 months, and birth is 9 months later, because that's physical time. But in the conceptual concept, this process is happening all the time. From the conception all the way to the formation, all the way to the final product, so to speak. Just keep that in mind in general. That's always a rule to know. But bottom line is, that's what he's describing here. Ulazeis, and because that is happening, the keli is being shaped and formed. And because that's what's happening after the tzimtzum, that's why then the keli could then receive also the klolos, not just the kav, like we learned before, but also the klolos that's higher than the gili kav, which means the Ein Sof before the tzimtzum. So this is, once he gave the dugma, the example of the student and teacher and student, he's now bringing it back to how it is lamaila. Same idea. That example helps us understand the process, and obviously the chiddush that now the kelim can actually receive. And again, if you think about this and develop it further, you literally can find a formula for healthy communication, healthy relationships, healthy balance. It's really what all this is about. If you want to really apply it in practical terms, it's esoteric in its language and the way it's presented, obviously. But this is the part that makes it so, I would say, enriching and so relevant, is when you understand how this applies to our lives in our own relationships. So the tzimtzum becomes, the kav, and all of this become really like tools and instruments that teach us how to balance, that balance between mashpia and makabel, between teacher, student, parent, child, or friend, spouses, or any other place where you have two entities that can be very different, and how do they really find harmony? Now, of course, this doesn't come easy, because there's plenty of, as we look in life and history, plenty of disharmony and plenty of battles and so on. But here he's describing the dynamics of what would make it work. And all this, let's go back, is explaining the purpose of creation. And of course, the chiddush, like what really is achieved. What's achieved is that we have now another entity that's not godly on its own, or you can call it independent consciousness, and is being prepared, like a student, to begin to absorb and be shaped and defined by the divine consciousness. And that's ultimately what a dir b'tachtenim means. A world, an existence that becomes a reflection of God, but it comes through our work and through a lot of work, because it does not come easily, because it's all concealed. The tzimtzum did its job. And as we see, it's not so easy to align your life with higher purpose and become this selfless and so on. But that we'll talk about more. That's really, what I'm talking now is really the theme of Samach Vav in general, the avodah of a person, how to become a more refined and a more elevated and more transcendent human being. But we'll get to that. Okay. Again, let me stop here if anybody wants to ask anything. Pretty, as I said, fundamental material and worthwhile to read again and again. The more you read this, the more your kalim become refined, our kalim become refined, and the more we can really absorb this. And I can tell you, it takes many times to really finally internalize this to the point where it becomes like second nature, and you see this like a way of looking at existence. Because we're so, let's call it pre-programmed with all kinds of our own, not always healthy tools and healthy approaches based on whatever the environment in which we live and so on, that to align ourselves to this type of thinking is work. It doesn't come easy. So the process is actually, right, the proof is in the pudding in your own very life. Take these ideas and how you internalize them is exactly the process he's describing here. So,
question.
Yeah, please.
Would you say that Mitzachzach Kalim is the same as Mevarach Kalim, or they're two different arenas?
I think not. In general terms, you could say that, but remember, this is happening most likely before Avodas HaAdam. In other words, it's not the person that's doing it, so this is God doing it. In other words, in the process of creation, it's like the teacher is helping shape the containers, like the potter. Whereas birur, I would refer probably more to what we do. When we take the kalim, like the student, and begin to work at it, I would probably, I've not seen that written somewhere explicitly, but my gut instinct tells me that's the way I would distinguish. But in very general terms, yeah, I mean, remember, there is a birur mamayla lamata, there's a birur mamata lamayla. So you could say tzachzuch, the tzachzuch is a form of birur. And I wouldn't be surprised in some places it describes it as such. But I'm referring to a birur more from the student's perspective. But that would be the way I would answer that.
Makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah.
Rabbi Jacobson, this Klolis Ha'er, Shalamayla Megillah Yakav that you're discussing, do I understand it correctly that this is actually the that's Lifnei HaTzimtzum that we're bringing down to this Keli?
Yes, I would say so, because there's no other before the Gilui Akav besides that Ein Sof. And he's not really distinguishing it, but I would say yes. The reason he's saying it's higher than Gilui Akav, because in the Eitz Chaim that he brought as an example, there he was talking about why the Arizal asks, why didn't he leave a Kav and concealed and then was Megal the Kav? And there the answer is because if he left the Kav, we would not be able to retain it. So that's why first there's a Helam and then comes the Gilui Akav. But now he's saying that the Yeshlemer here is that it's just not just the Gilui Akav, you're also getting that where the Kav is getting from, which is the Ein Sof Finite Tzimtzum. Remember, the Kav is coming from somewhere. It's not a self-made entity. The Kav is a stream that comes from the Ein Sof Finite Tzimtzum. The only thing it's coming in a narrow flow, not the full picture. So that's, you are correct, bottom line.
Thank you.
Okay, good. So now one more. Yeah, any other question?
You might not like this. It's more of a processing, but about the Riboy and the 40 years. There's the 6,000 years to Mashiach. So there's the 400 years of Torah. When Torah is introduced, there's 2,000 years Torah and 2,000 years of Mashiach, right? That's 4,000. That's 4,000 years. So maybe that's somehow related to the Riboy.
What Riboy?
It says after a Riboy of
Riboy Hashpah.
Yeah, Riboy Hashpah.
What is
after a
4,000
Riboy Hashpah? I mean, it's pretty audacious to say that the moyach of the Rav that goes to the moyach of the Talmud. It's like we're talking here about God and a human being, right? How could we say that we could align?
Well, why can't you just say because we were created in the divine image and God gave us the power to do so?
But to ad kedei kach that moyach hatalmid.
Yeah. So what you're adding adds to what I just said. Why? Because obviously it's a process. God created the existence, He said, I want you to build a dira b'tachtenim. He gave the human race the power to create a home for God in this world. Yeah, that's asli migdash v'shachanti b'seicham. It is audacious, but it's God that gave us that power. And when we work hard through our efforts, it includes all the thousands of years. But even in the beginning, Adam and Chava were given this power to create a home for God, and so in all the generations. When Mashiach comes, like he said earlier, the job will be finished, at least to that stage. So that is yes, it's a major statement that God created existence and gave human beings the power to be a partner with him and emulate him, meaning God, and actually create a home for him, a comfortable home for Atzmus in this world. Okay.
Thank you.
Good. We're not afraid of being audacious, let's put it that way. So now, the Rebbe Rashab now adds one more piece, which actually is, let me see if they write it in the footnotes. It's actually from Tanya in chapter 36, and may even actually address what you just asked, if come to think of it. Because the Alter Rebbe in Perek Lamed Vav, chapter 36 in Tanya, says, okay, now that we know that we can make a dira b'tachtenim and bring the highest levels of godliness into this world, so what exactly gives us the power to do so? And the obvious answer is, of course, like I just said, God created us, the divine image. He gave us a neshama, chelik elikam emal mamish. Doesn't mention all that here, but that's obvious. And thus we have divine power to do this. Still comes with our effort. Using the example, the teacher could teach all day the student, but the student has to use his own seichel too. And he's given seichel. Remember, the teacher did not create the mind of the student. The very mind, I mean. He's training it, and he is refining it, and he's transmitting critical information. But the student has seichel. So the Alter Rebbe answers, well, I don't know if it's question and answer, but he explains, Hashem oiz la'ama yitin, Hashem yivarach hasama v'shalom, ein oiz ela Torah. Because Hashem also gave us a Torah, and the Torah is a raisa v'kutshabichu kulachar, is God's wisdom. So the Torah gives us, in addition to our neshama, if you remember in Ayin Bey's long discussion, what Torah adds to the neshama, the Torah gives us a blueprint. So the neshama can follow in this world. If you remember right in the beginning, the bottom of page 4, when he said, what is the purpose of existence? He said to bring Gilead and Sof Be'el al Yedei Torah and mitzvahs. So you could ask the question, why do we need Torah and mitzvahs? Why not just be a mensch, behave like a good human being, follow the moral laws? What do you need Torah and mitzvahs for? So besides the fact that Torah and mitzvahs obviously includes all that morality and tells us what to do, but it's also a divine blueprint. It's an additional koyach, siyua, in the words of Ayin Beis, a support that guides us in this dark world. How can Tachtenim know how to build a Mishkan? So you need to open up a Torah, and Moshe Rabbeinu tells us what Hashem said. Here's how you build a Mishkan. You take gold, silver, gold, copper, materials. You build an ark. You build a menorah. You build a mizbeach. Here's how you serve. It's a whole elaborate system. So Torah mitzvahs gives us strength to bring an Eir Ein Sof into the Keli in a way that the Keli can contain it without being overwhelmed. So the Rebbe Rashab now adds that piece right here. And he says like this, Va'ikr, hu lefi she'hamshacha ha'idei Torah. So in addition to everything we said, the teacher transmitting the energy in a way that's tailored and channeled and toward the containers of the student doing his work of receiving it properly, absorbing it, studying it, growing. So the Iker, he says, is because the Hamshach is coming through Torah. Through Torah. Uksiv Hashem eiz la'am yitin ein eiz l'Torah. God give his strength. Eiz comes from the word strength, power, to his people, to his nation. Ein eiz l'Torah. Whenever you say eiz, it means nothing but Torah. So strength, what means strength? Strength can mean physical strength, but here Torah is giving, essentially using this example, the student, or the kelim after the tzimtzum, the strength. Through the Torah allows the tzaddikim. And when he means tzaddikim here, he does not mean excluding anyone else. It's like amach kulim tzaddikim. It's only the expression, I believe, used in some places because obviously who follows Torah is someone that tzaddikim ultimately are the ultimate followers of Torah. But he's not suggesting this is not for anyone. It means all of us. That it gives them the power to receive the Eidei Sof Shalamayla Ma'elamis v'lo yizbatlu mitziyusam. So in addition to everything we spoke about here, a primary factor is that it's Torah that's giving us the ability, because Torah combines two things. It's God's wisdom and God's will, but it's given to us in an intelligent manner. When we learn Torah, we understand it. So it's tailored to our intelligence. So in the context of student and teach, not just the teacher teaching ideas to the student, he's teaching him divine ideas. Or in this case, the teacher is the divine example for the divine. So what is being transmitted to the student is divine tools. And as such, they give the power to be mamshech something l'mayla ma'elamis, because Torah originates, remember, l'mayla ma'elam, alpayim shana kod m'Torah, Torah is higher than is the blueprint of existence. And yet it comes down here below to us, giving us the strength to receive this light without becoming annihilated in the process. The chena elamis, and the same with the words, yechem lekabel se'er al yedei zeh. So the tzaddikim receive it through Torah, and the worlds as well, through this, receive this eir, u'kamei shekasav, and here clearly states, b'sefer shabenim, seif perik lamed vav. End of chapter 36 in Tanya, what I mentioned before. V'nimtza. So now he's concluding the Alpi Poshet. So still the first explanation of what is achieved after the Tzimtzum, when the Eidei Sof was there already before the Tzimtzum. So what's the conclusion? What do we derive from all this? What's the takeaway? Even though it's the exact Eir, as it was there, that filled the space before there was a Tzimtzum. Koydem at Tzimtzum. Even though that's the case, omnam. Nevertheless, haiskachus bezeh. Nevertheless, what's the chiddush? Not mitzad the oir, but mitzad the kelim. Mashayiyah gili be'elamis. The chiddush is that this gili, before the tzimtzum, did not allow room, and there was no other. There was no student. There was nothing but existence, but the divine. Now there is elamis, and these elamis meaning existence, and these elamis can receive that gili. That's the, as he called, Alpi Poshet, the chiddush of Avodas Ha'adam, what we accomplish, what we achieve over reality that was there pre-existence or pre-Tzimtzum. But then now he's going to add a critical piece, which in many ways, again, is laying the groundwork for the whole Hemshech Samach Vav of what Avodah really accomplished. Because this is really the question here. What are we accomplishing? Because in this case, even after we just said, you could ask the question, that's very nice, that we accomplished, we can now receive. But does the teacher gain anything from all this? Does God gain anything from all of this? And we say the word gain, obviously, kavyachol. We're not talking about there was something missing. But now he's going to address the question, is there anything more than, it's not a small thing what we just discussed, that a student can become like a teacher, that this existence can become a dira b'tachtenim, exactly as Eidei Sof Finite Tzimtzum is tremendous. But he's going to say it's much more than that as well. That's the next piece here. But before I continue, let me stop again for any questions, and then we'll continue. Yeah. V'oid yesh shleimer. So now comes the Rebbe Rashab saying v'oid yesh shleimer. And I mean, over the years, many of us have wondered, what is this the Rebbe Rashab's chiddush? Because yesh shleimer is a chiddush of the Rebbe Rashab. He wouldn't say yesh shleimer if it was said already in my Morim before that. So clearly there is a chiddush from the Rebbe Rashab here, but that we'll talk about afterwards. First, let's read what it is, and then we'll see what did the Rebbe Rashab add here that was not understood before quite this way. So here's the Eidya Shlemer. And keep in mind, this is in contrast to Al Pi Poshet. First he began Ach Al Pi Poshet. What was the simple or ostensible explanation in the Chiddush? Now he says, Eidya Shlemer in the Chiddush that happens through our Aveda after the Tzimtzum. Eidya Shlemer. Till now we were talking about the Chiddush is that very energy that was there before the Tzimtzum then became concealed. The student and the recipient and our existence could not receive all of that. It slowly is transmitted step by step, spoon-fed, you can say, through the Kav. And as we grow and mature, the Kelim grow, we become Chushei Rav, Chushei Talmud Chushei Rav, that the student can now fully absorb the Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum. That's that. That's a Chiddush. Now he's saying, let's just read the words again, that the Gili is even higher than the that was there before. Till now we're talking about having the that was there before is now here. Now he's saying something else happens. A new Gili that never existed, even Lifnei Tzimtzum, wasn't yet in a conscious state. That is what happens through Aveda. V'zeu ha-teis v'seidus. And this is what we mean when we say the teis v'seidus, the abundance, the additional divine energies. Shenim shecha yedei ha-teireh mitzvahs. Teis v'seidus is not just teis v'seidus compared to us, that we first have small containers and we only receive raindrops, and then our containers expand and we're able to receive more. But Teis V'Seir is talking about even the Ur itself, new levels of Ur that Lifnei Tzimtzum were not even yet revealed. Sheyer b'chinas primius v'atzmus Ein Sof shalamayla gama shahaya mamala mokam achol. That you're getting the inner and core of Ein Sof that's even higher than the Ur that filled the space before the Tzimtzum. We're not talking about after, before the Tzimtzum even. So as high the level of Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum, Aveda reaches deeper than that. Ukamoshi is boyer, as shall be explained. Down below in the footnotes, they tell us where it's explained. A long place from here, 600 pages from later, this is going to be discussed in detail. But the Rebbe Rashab is establishing it right here. Ubederech klal, he adds, and in general, this level is referring to Zeu Gili B'chinas Ein Sof HaSevav Kalalman. This is in general Sevav Kalalman, higher than Mamala Kalalman. In other words, Ein Sof Mamala Mokam Achol is the root of imminent energy, Mamala Kalalman. In general, we're talking about Sevav Kalalman, but remember, this is higher than Ein Sof that fills the space of the Lifnei Tzimtzum. Shebeshvil Zeh Hayatachlis Habriya the Elamis. And in order to achieve that, that was the ultimate purpose of creation. Not just that the Kalim and the Elamis should receive the Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum, but it should receive what he's calling now Ein Sof Sevav Kalam, that's even higher than the air that is there before the Tzimtzum. Now we're going to learn it's even more than Sevav Kalam too. But Sevav Kalam is quite a high level, because remember, Sevav Kalam means it transcends even the air where God is envisioning existence, which is the Ein Sof Mamala Mokam Achol. We'll talk about that more later. I don't want to go into the details right now, what each level is, but we will discuss it. So bottom line is, the Eidya Shlemer comes to add that it's not just from the recipient's point of view. The Chiddush is that we now can receive what the teacher, everything the teacher has to offer, but we actually receive levels that are even higher than the teacher before he began to teach, meaning even higher than Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum that was there before the Tzimtzum. Even higher levels than that, what he calls Primis V'atzmus Ein Sof. So that is the additional point here. And then with that, that's like laying the ground. This is going to be elaborated upon in Samach Vav. I would say, honestly, when you learn Samach Vav, this last piece we just learned is hundreds of pages of explanation, what that means exactly. We're going to get back to it much later, but everything we're going to learn is all about teaching us these two stages, but especially the higher stage, that Avodah does accomplish something more than just bringing back the Ur before the Tzimtzum. And that's what dira b'tachtenim ultimately means. It's a dira la'atzmusei. Remember, atzmus. It's not a dira to Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum. You don't see that expression. It's a home for atzmus. However, obviously, you have to go through Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum because that's a stage. First, you have to reach the level of your teacher before you can go beyond that, even, so to speak. So the teacher, even the highest level of the teacher, is still commensurate to the student, no matter how brilliant he is. He's teaching an idea. And then there's deeper levels, even beyond that, that we're going to be revealing and manifesting through our Avodah. So when we talk about Mashiach comes, it's not just getting back to square one of Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum, but now it's inside of Kalim. We have a whole new Chiddush, that the whole new levels of that never existed in the first place in any conscious level. Now, obviously, Atzmos always exists, but Atzmos should be a Dira B'Tachtenim. That is unprecedented. So it's two Chidushim that he's talking about here. One, the Poshet, simple one that we can contain the as it was before the Tzimtzum, which is a pretty big Chiddush as it is, and then much more than that, which, like he says, Kamosh Yizbar shall be explained. So I'm not going to explain it now in detail because that's what the whole Hemshech Samach Vav really is about, getting to that place. Now, those of us who have already learned Ayin Beis, in a way, Ayin Beis comes after Samach Vav. So in truth, first you're supposed to learn this, and then you learn Ayin Beis. But so be it. So if you think about the ideas in Ayin Beis, you'll see a lot of it is really coming after you learn about the Ein Sof, Lifnei Tzimtzum, and then even higher than that. That's a big part of, especially the end of Ayin Beis, if you recall the three levels of Yichud. But I don't want to confuse matters more than necessary. So let me stop here, end of the paragraph on page 6. And the floor is yours. Anybody wants to comment or ask any questions?
Yeah, question.
Please go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. Is this a related question? Is this not the Or Chayzer? And if it's not, and if it is, what do you mean by saying that his Yesh
Did you say the word Or Chayzer?
Yeah.
What are you referring to? The higher level of Ein Sof?
That it reaches the higher level of the Or Ein Sof, the Or Chayzer.
Well, the Rebbe Rashab doesn't use that word or expression, so I wouldn't use it at this point. I would wait to see how the Rebbe Rashab explains it. I mean, if you're looking for explanation right now, you can do that. I would wait to see how the Rebbe Rashab develops this, because he himself is laying it out right now. It's not like he just said a line and now we have to guess. There's plenty on this material that he talks about it. Ur Chayzer generally means the that comes from Mamata Lamaila Ar Avodah.
Right.
So the first level is also Ur Chayzer. Ar Avodah absorbs the Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum. So I wouldn't necessarily use Ur Chayzer. I'm not sure what you mean, maybe, but you're definitely referring to things you learned elsewhere, because he doesn't mention that expression here, right?
Right. You're right. That's why I asked the question.
I'm not sure what you learned. I mean, if you want me to bring all my knowledge about
no. That's
I prefer not to do that, because, as I said, I would wait and see how the Rebbe Rashab explains it. Yes, Ur Chayzer is going to be part of a discussion, as in contrast to Ur Yashar, but I would not say it's necessarily this level per se. It could be also the first level.
The only reason I asked is because you introduced by saying this is something that Yair Lamer that never has been said before. That's what I picked up. Where you started this.
Yeah, the Oid Yesh Lemer. Okay, but let's see how the Rebbe Rashab explains it.
Okay.
Yeah.
No problem.
I have a question.
I don't see. I just want to say. I just understand. We just finished learning Ayin Beis for many, many years, and we learned the end of Ayin Beis. And you say it reflects the end of Ayin Beis. I don't see at the level of getting to Atzmos. As this seemed to me a much broader statement than we learned in Ayin Beis. Maybe I'm forgetting something. It's unreal to me what you just said, Simon.
Well, let me put it this way. When you learn this first, and then you learn Ayin Beis, you see how Ayin Beis goes further than this. I think maybe we got spoiled a bit because we learned Ayin Beis in depth, and we talked about this and more. But I could explain it. I don't know if I want to do that right now. First of all, not everyone in this class learned Ayin Beis with us, and also it's going to go into a longer discussion. I'll just suffice it to say for those that, if you get what I'm going to say now, maybe, hopefully, in Ayin Beis, he goes not just into higher levels of that were before the Tzimtzum, he talks about the Helam Ha'atzmi, and he talks about Einoid, how the concealment itself reveals Etzem. That is not spoken about so much in Ayin Beis. In Samach Vav. Samach Vav, all this is still not Helam Ha'atzmi. Even though you're going to learn that Aveda B'Koyach Atzmei does reach Helam Ha'atzmi, we're going to learn that expression. But being that I did learn both, Samach Vav, Ayin Beis, you'll see how I will explain it as we go later, how Ayin Beis takes it to the next level. But it would be not fair to go there now because we haven't learned Samach Vav yet. So first let's learn Samach Vav, then I will definitely show how Ayin Beis goes even further. But there's plenty of overlap, and it's all quite mind-blowing.
Oh, really? Boy.
Tzvi, did you have a follow-up?
I just want to say, to get to osmos, the aura of osmos, and that has to be, can't be like a hidden thing. It has to be. If you're talking about gili, you're talking about or is by nature gili. It just shook me up. It's like I didn't even learn any Ayin Beis after 14 years.
I'm glad to hear that. Maybe you should get a bagel and butter fast before your neshama goes too high.
God forbid. It hit me too, but my mind went to where you started to summarize. So that doesn't so much. I definitely want to hear it, the case made, and even more so you to do the linkage between the two Hamshechim. That would be great. But just without jumping ahead to try to get the answer, because I heard you, it's going to be explained over hundreds of pages. Just conceptually, how you're framing, or how the Rebbe's framing the question here. It's hard to understand if before the Tzimtzum you had just Etzem, whether it was Bagilui or whether it was Behelim, you have Etzem. It's just Atzmus. It can be nothing else. So it's hard to conceive of more light than Etzem itself. That's what I'm. So how do you frame the question?
That premise, what you just said, is incorrect.
Why?
When we say, because he uses the word Erein Sof Mamala Kol Achol. He doesn't say Etzem Mamala Kol Achol.
I see. Okay, right there. I got it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, but you just said it's not, or instead of, you said it's even higher that. But right, you used the word, I think, Atzmos, not Oren Sof.
Well, first of all, he used it. If you look at it, he used the word
way he set it up. But this,
but if you look at the word, he said B'derech Klal Zeh B'chinas Sevav Kalaman. Atzmus is even higher than Sevav Kalaman, just for the record.
I mean, that's obvious, but
okay. So
the way you were just explaining it, use the word Atzmos.
Just keep in mind.
Atzmos actually as Gili.
What's that? The Finite Tzimtzum itself, you have many levels. So without going into those levels, it's going to be very hard to explain with. Right now, what we've established, let me put it this way, that the level of Erein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum, Mamala Mokam Achol, by definition is already an Erein Sof that God allocated to be Lifnei Tzimtzum. It's not Atzmus itself, it's already an but it's an that doesn't leave room for existence yet. That's why you need a Tzimtzum. So what you really want to understand is what else is going on before the Tzimtzum besides that Erein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum. That he can say that there's even more.
Well said, yeah.
Sevav Kalaman, and beyond that, Etzem. That's yeah, exactly.
You're giving hints how you figure it out.
That blows me away. When you just said that in or itself, it's something that I can think possibly. But when you say Atzmos, and I thought you had said that before, that blew me away. This I can maybe accept a little bit of. I mean, I don't understand it, but I can accept it.
Because I'll tell you why. Because at the end of the day, it will be a dira la'atzmusei is baruch. But before you get to atzmus, you want to get to the of atzmus. Because if the student cannot fully understand the teacher's seichel, he's definitely not going to understand the etzem of the teacher. You understand? Think of it that way.
Yeah, but I can think of.
You remember the example
I can understand after another 50 years understanding you're etzum, and but to get to the Abish's atzmos is like is sort of different than
Okay, that's another
understanding
question. But remember, we also come with the cumulative energy of our parents and grandparents and generations before. We're not coming alone, and we're coming with a Torah. I mean, there's a lot. When we say we're right before Mashiach's coming, we don't stand alone. We stand with the thousands of years of work behind us. We are just like finishing the job. That's one thing. Second thing, keep in mind, remember the example I've given often about first you have to understand the artist that created the art through the art. Then you come to realize that he's not even an artist. Then you come to realize he's not even that. So we're talking about a process that we haven't even really got into. The Rebbe Rashab just laid the groundwork. The fact that we learned Ayin Beis, we learned these levels. That's why I referred to them. But if you go back here and just learn what we learned here he just basically made the statement, there's Eir Ein Sof Mal Mokem Achol, there's the Eir in the Kav after the Tzimtzum, the Kav is working its way back to before the Tzimtzum. Now we learned there's something higher than that, that's the Oidya Shlemer, but we haven't really got into what else is going on there. So just keep that in mind. And yes, I have laid out the building blocks of the ultimate answer. But and you can, by all means, I've never told anyone not to look ahead. You can go and learn ahead. I'm just saying how the Rebbe Rashab is unpacking and how the narrative is unfolding. He's begun, he said clearly, Kamoshi is bar. That's a strong statement. It means he's going to explain this. So we're getting there. As you know, need a little patience. Remember, as I've said many times, it's not just about understanding it. It's avodah. If you really want to internalize these levels, you have to really find how you find it within yourself. That's the only way to really fully appreciate it. From a Haskalah point of view, philosophical point of view, we can place and say, okay, we got the Eir Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum, now we have Eir Ein Sof that's even higher than that, and there's more than that, and more than that. That's the mechanics. As I've said, that's the technical mechanics. But if you really want to appreciate it, you have to see it within yourself. Like I would ask yourself the question: where are you in regard to your chushim? How aligned are you to God's attributes? Is your chesed, or is it somewhat divine chesed? So let's start first in the lowest level, before the Oidya Shlemer. Let's just see how close we are, how the student is close to the teacher before we go even deeper and higher. See what I'm saying?
And continuing what you just said, I actually found really exciting when you told about Hasidim apply of this particular pasuk from this teaching to our life. And from this point of view, I should say, the more you learn into this teaching, the more fine perception of this world you have of your own. You can see the reality on a very surface level. But as soon as you start teaching, it's like a workouting of your muscles. Your perception became broader and your horizons became wider. And from this point of view, you're absolutely right. This particular episode gives us a chance to understand the whole process, why God gave us Tzimtzum, how He nourishes us to grow from inside, to expand our Kelly in order to see more. And see is a key. We in Ayin Beis we often use Ria as a key point of see godliness, and I found really intriguing when he said, "And you will," you said, "You will learn more," as if you said, just keep in mind it's not only oil or that. We were talking, there is oil in ahead that we will learn more. And this is exactly, be ready to expand your Kelly. Be ready to apply it to yourself. Thank you, Rabbi.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I'll just add one more thing before we conclude here the recording. What was I going to say? Got it ready. Oh, if you go to samachvov.com, where I write the running summary of the 61 discourses, you'll see the flow of this idea. You could already find the answer there pretty briefly, because there I do a short summary of the whole Hemshech. And it wouldn't hurt to look at it, because you get a picture, and obviously as we learn it, it'll become fully blossom, I would say. But you could look at that. I find that to be very helpful, because it gives you a very good overview of the whole flow from beginning to the end of the Hemshech. And of course, it addresses this very question about how high we reach and so on. So I just want to throw that out there. Remember as well, I wrote essays, something like 25 or 30 essays on central themes in Ayin Beis. That could also be helpful, but I'm just referring
Did you
to
mean
that
to say
page.
Samach Vav? You said Ayin Beis.
Samach Vav, yeah, Samach Vav, sorry. The themes of Samach Vav in addition to the running summary, yeah, correct. Okay, so we'll stop here, end of paragraph, middle of
That's
page
a cliff
6.
notes. That's a cliff notes. What you're Samach Vav. I
Yeah.
saw that many years ago.
Basically.
Yeah, correct.
It
So I'm gonna
actually
stop.
connects to Rosh Hashanah, right? Because doesn't the Alter Rebbe say that when you blow the shofar, you bring down lights that were never seen before?
He says that, but I'm not making now connections that the Rebbe Rashab didn't make. We'll talk about that. Yes, it does connect. So now let me stop here.